So something happened with the Wi-Fi in shul, and so I'm connected to my hotspot now, and so I apologize for that, and thank you for for your patience. Um, okay, so I was reading verse 19 on page 697, chapter 19, verse 19. It's just so annoying when technology happens like this. Um, and I just want to see if, okay, I think I can connect to a different network now.
Well,
Just a second. All there? You're all there now? Okay.
yeah,
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So, because I switched from my personal hotspot to back to the internet and shul. Um, technology. Okay, so chapter 19, verse 19. Et chukotai tish moru, behemtecha lo tarbia kilayim, sadacha lo tizra kilayim, uveged kilayim shatnez, lo ya'ale alecha. So what does this mean? You shall observe my laws. It could also be understood as ordinances. Okay, chukim. You follow my chukim. I'll talk about chukim in a minute when we look below the line. So what are examples of chukim? You shall not let your cattle mate with a different kind, right? Animals need to mate with their own kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed. So kilayim is different kinds put together. Okay, so you can't put two different seeds in the same hole in the ground. You can't put two different animals together to mate. But then, so a whole different conversation. Why is it okay to buy a mule? Why is it okay to make a mule? Why is it okay to grow nectarines? Why is grafting okay, but not putting two, right? You can graft a plum branch onto a peach branch or vice versa to make a nectarine. Why is that okay? But the seeds themselves you can't put in the ground. Conversation for another time. You shall not put on cloth from a mixture of two kinds of material. That usually means wool and linen are not allowed to be made together. That's called shatnez. This word you can't. It's just translated here, cloth from a mixture of two kinds of material. That's how shatnez is understood. And there are people who are very careful about garments that they buy to make sure that they don't have wool and linen together. And there are places within the ultra-Orthodox world that actually has a laboratory you can send. Like this mainly happens with suits. Men's suits, maybe women's suits too. If it says 100% wool on the label, that's what you want to buy. You can, or wool with some artificial material, that's okay. But wool with cotton is okay. But wool, it's wool with linen. Wool with linen is not okay. And sometimes there are some people who send them to a laboratory to make sure that it's not combining. So anyway, this idea of combining things that aren't by nature intended to be combined, that's what this verse is talking about. But it's the concept here of chukim that the commentary points out. What is a chok, singular? What are chukim? What kind of moral laws are there? So the sages understand, we're below the line, understand chukim as referring to rules for which there seems to be no rational explanation, like these rules about animals, seeds, and clothing. Like what would be wrong with making wool and linen garments like that? We follow them not because they make sense, as do laws forbidding murder or commanding rest on Shabbat, but as opportunities to do God's will. When a Jew follows God's command without understanding the reason for it, we can understand the relationship in one of three ways: as that of slave to master with obedience compelled, as that of pupil to teacher in which the pupil assumes that the teacher knows what is right and necessary, even if the pupil cannot see the point of it, although the pupil may hope one day to understand it. Or, so in other words, we follow the chok because we have to, like a slave has to obey his master, or as a student learning and not up on everything that the teacher is teaching, but you have trust in the teacher, or as that of people in love, in which one takes pleasure in knowing what he or she can do to please the beloved. In other words, you might not want to do what your spouse suggests to do, but you want to make your spouse happy, so you do it. Might not make sense to you, but you do it because your spouse would like you to do that. So three different ways to view laws that are understood in this way of no logical reason behind them. So now it goes on. Conservative Judaism tends to give the tradition the benefit of the doubt when it baffles us, but does not morally offend us. So I'm thinking about the laws of homosexuality. Okay, we learned in last week's portion in chapter 18 that a man shall not lie with a man in a manner of lying with a woman. It is an abomination, right? So what about it is abominable? Okay, is the homosexual act itself abominable? Okay, so in other words, when it does not morally offend us, but if a law against homosexuality is offensive, then when the tradition, if we continue here, when the tradition asks us to do something that does offend us morally, conservative Judaism claims the right to challenge and, if necessary, change the tradition, not because we see our judgment as superior to that of the Torah, but because our judgment has been shaped by the values of the Torah, and we are in effect calling the Torah to judge itself. So let's take something less controversial now than homosexuality. And maybe homosexuality isn't so controversial anymore either, but let's take gender egalitarianism. Okay, so in my day, when I entered rabbinical school in 1984, that was the first year that women were allowed into rabbinical school. And there was still a brouhaha in the conservative movement about granting full and equal rights to women religiously, right? So there's nothing specific in the Torah that says women can't do things. That's based on rabbinic interpretation. And the rabbinic interpretation was that women are not obligated to observe all 613 commandments. They're exempt from some. So the exemption then becomes morally offensive, because they're exempt, therefore, then they're not allowed to participate fully. Okay, and that not allowed to participate fully becomes morally offensive. And so it came a point where you needed to reinterpret the terms to a point where it becomes morally acceptable. And so understanding the exemption as not a prohibition, but as an opportunity to, if women want to take upon themselves the obligation, then they can. And that's how it's been understood for the past 60, not 60, how many years is it? 40 years. 40 years since rabbinical school. It's a lot longer than that for women being counted in a minyan in conservative synagogues. So 50 years at least for that. So that's how there's a method to be able to take something that has been understood that is understood now, but wasn't understood before as morally offensive, and changing it. So that is within rabbinic, so egalitarianism was within a rabbinic understanding. It's not direct, it's not in the Torah itself, whereas homosexuality is from the Torah itself. That's that verse from chapter 18, last week's portion, is the verse on which homosexuality is derived, anti-homosexuality is derived, and that today is seen as morally offensive, to the point in 2006 where the law committee met and deliberated for a long time about it and said, comes a time where we have to say that that law is offensive, and we're going to interpret it in a way that it just is not understood that way anymore. And so that's how, that's what this commentary is saying, that the conservative movement gives itself the permission and with a mechanism on how to change something that is moral, a chok, one of these laws that doesn't make logical sense, but we have to follow it because it says it in the Torah. If it's morally offensive, then we change it. So as opposed to kashrut, right? Assuming that it's okay, not morally offensive, to slaughter an animal to eat, that's a different subject. If so, one can make a moral argument that it's okay to slaughter an animal and prepare it to consume it. If that's not morally offensive, then it doesn't matter which animals you can slaughter and which animals you can't slaughter, right? It's not less morally offensive to slaughter a cow than it is to slaughter a pig. So if you're making a choice between cow or pig, that's not a moral dilemma. And that's why the laws of kashrut have never been argued as from a moral standpoint. That it's been argued, the idea of eating meat has been argued from a vegetarian perspective or a vegan perspective. But if you buy into that it's okay to slaughter an animal to eat it, then it doesn't really matter which animal you're slaughtering and which animals you're not slaughtering. So it's not a morally offensive concept that we can't eat pig. And there's no moral argument that says we should be eating pig now because it has been morally repugnant that we haven't been able to eat it. That's just not a philosophical legal argument that has ever been made. But about homosexuality, that is a moral argument today. May not have been a moral argument 100 years ago or 50 years ago, but it is today. So therefore, that is reason for the conservative movement law committee to argue it. Okay, so let's just finish this section here. Right, we affirm that the halachic process has striven to embody the highest moral principles, where changing conditions produce what seem to be immoral consequences and human anguish. Varying approaches exist within our community to rectify the situation. Okay, and that's from a document that came out 40 years ago called Emet Ve'emunah, that basic underlying principles of what conservative Judaism stands for. Okay, so that's what I wanted to bring up today. Any questions or comments? Yes, Lori.
Yeah, when you were talking about don't insult the deaf,
Yes.
one of the things going through my mind is when people have a disagreement and feel very strongly it's an emotional disagreement and can't really hear each other.
Right.
So you could, easily
Absolutely.
go to a lower level.
That's a great example of how to understand don't curse the deaf. Like you can be emotionally deaf. Like it comes a point in an argument that someone's becoming deaf to your words because it's just been so hurtful. You need to be aware of that and stop.
Mhm.
Take a step back. Yes. So that's a perfect way to understand that. Yes, Barbara.
I have it in my book where Barbanel says that same thing is a metaphor for the stronger that the stronger should not afflict the weaker
Right.
in a very more general.
Yes, there's that too. Absolutely. So yes, that's a good way to understand it as well. Yeah, very good. Okay, so have a good rest of the day. Next week, next 2 weeks, we have Torah study. So the 15th and then the 22nd, and then we're off for the summer. We'll resume after after Labor Day. So just a reminder about that. Take care, everyone, and thanks for the patience with the technology today.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.